Welcome to Distance Learning, brought to you by the Palm Beach County School District Office of African, African American, Latino, Holocaust, and Gender Studies. Today's lesson is a very brief overview of lessons 1 through 7. For this lesson, you will need to access the African American History lesson plans located on the School District of Palm Beach County Google Curriculum site. Within the lesson plans, you will find the materials that correspond to this lesson. Today, we are briefly going to discuss the 4 different time periods we discussed previously. Those time periods are African Americans at the turn of the century, the World War II era, the Freedom Movement, and the Black Power movement. Activate your thinking. Think about what you have learned in previous lessons. What time period would you consider to be a pivotal moment in African American history? Take a moment to reflect. During lesson 1, we discussed the ideologies of W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington. Du Bois believed the advancement of Black people was the responsibility of the Black elite, who he referred to as the talented 10th. He disagreed with Booker T. Washington's ideas that accepting segregation and agricultural and industrial training would lead to prosperity for Blacks. Du Bois also founded the Niagara Movement in 1905. He was also a founding member of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Du Bois believed that Blacks should focus on self-determination. So although their ideologies differed, their influences were widespread throughout the African American community, and many movements and organizations would develop as a result of their ideologies. More specifically, W.E.B. Du Bois, we will see more of him as we talk more about the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement. In lesson 2, we discussed the Great Depression and its effects on Black people. So prior to the Great Depression, Blacks had thriving communities and businesses of their own. The Depression brought about more challenges. Some Black businesses went under, like being a bank, and some businesses thrived and survived through the Great Depression, such as Atlanta Life Insurance Company and North Carolina Mutual Insurance Company. So during the Depression, President Roosevelt sought to get the United States economy back on track with the New Deal. The New Deal consisted of the Social Security Act, the National Labor Relations Act, and the Works Progress Administration. The New Deal had its challenges in regards to economic oppression. For example, at that time, the Social Security Act excluded domestic workers and agricultural workers. These were jobs held mostly by African Americans. Politically, Blacks began to use politics as a means of improving their economic conditions. More Blacks were involved in politics during FDR's presidency. Mary McLeod Bethune played a powerful role in Roosevelt's Black cabinet. Also, FDR was able to gain the support of Blacks, which led to his reelection in 1936. The New Deal helped, but it did not erase the racism and economic oppression that Blacks continued to face. During the World War II era, Black people found themselves in a fight against fascism overseas and the fight against racism and inequality in the United States. This became known as the Double V campaign. The armed forces developed policies that were rooted in racism, ignored the abilities of Black men and women who wanted to serve the country. Despite this, Blacks still made major contributions during World War II. Dory Miller became a Navy hero by shooting down enemy aircraft during the attack on Pearl Harbor. The Tuskegee Airmen fought through harshness and racism to become an all-Black, successful combat air unit during World War II. Two major contributions that are often overlooked during this time were contributed by Dr. Charles Drew and Frederick McKinley Jones. Dr. Drew was an African-American surgeon who is credited with the creation of the blood bank. He discovered methods for storing and processing blood plasma for transfusions. So Dr. Drew collected blood from over 100,000 donors during World War II. And the way that they refrigerated this blood or kept it cool was due to the contribution of Frederick McKinley Jones. He was an African-American engineer who held over 60 patents and is well known for his patents in refrigeration technology. He created an air conditioning unit for military field hospitals and a refrigeration system to house blood and medicine. The modern civil rights movement played an important role in transforming the legal and social status of African Americans. There are a few defining moments we discussed in previous lessons: Brown versus the Board of Education, the murder of Emmett Till, the Montgomery bus boycott, the Greensboro sit-ins, the Freedom Rides, and Mississippi Freedom Summer. The movement brought about new methods of protest. Black people strategically planned protests to fight against racism and discrimination. However, not all activists supported MLK's nonviolent strategies. Some felt that King's strategies were ineffective and more action should be taken in order for change to occur. And that leads us into the next movement, which was founded on Black nationalism, the Black Power movement. Black nationalism was rooted in Black activism prior to the Civil Rights Movement. In 1967, the Civil Rights Movement shifted from protest against segregation and disenfranchisement and discrimination to Black mobilization. Black people lost patience with the slow pace of racial change. Despite new legislation, Blacks continued to deal with racism, discrimination, as well as economic and political oppression. And an increase in racial violence against Blacks continued. As the Civil Rights Movement weakened, Black Americans turned to Black nationalism. So some of the important people and groups that we talked about during the Black Power movement, one important person, of course, is Malcolm X, who spoke out against capitalism and white supremacy and advocated for self-defense. Malcolm X was a member of the Nation of Islam, but he soon broke away from that organization as his popularity grew, and he also disagreed with some of the things that were going on. He went on a pilgrimage later on in his life, and when he came back, he changed his name to El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz. He continued to lecture and speak until he was assassinated on February 21st, 1965. The Black Panther Party was also an important organization we talked about, who did things in the community, such as their popular breakfast program where they fed children before school. They also organized clinics. They had drug education programs. They did all types of things to help advance the community and support Black people. In the 1970s, the Black Panther Party had over 30 national chapters in major cities throughout the United States. This concludes this week's lesson. So as you reflect, I want you to think about a time period that we've covered that may stand out to you. So, are there any pivotal moments or defining moments that stand out to you? Are there any important people or organizations that are important or may stand out as well? Take a moment to reflect and write down your thoughts. You will need these answers for this week's lesson. Thank you for listening.